Hello, everyone. I'm State Representative Joe Hohenstein, and we are here in the Eagles press room to do the final segment of the Disability Summit with the Cities of Inclusion. And this is our legislative policy hearing. So the intention with this hearing is to have leaders from within the disability community present and talk about their own experiences as people with disabilities, the issues that they see facing the society as a whole, how those issues impact our disability community, and then what the community itself has to contribute to the solutions for those problems. And I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues in the State House. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves, starting from my right.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeannie McNeil, and I represent 133rd District in Lehigh County.
Good afternoon, everyone. State Representative Danilo Burgos of the 197th Legislative District, and also Chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Latino Caucus.
Hi, I'm Senator Tina Tartaglione. I represent the 2nd District in Philadelphia.
And Senator Tartaglione has done us the honor of opening up the proceedings by being the first person to talk about those experiences that we just talked about. She is my personal senator. I
And
live in
his.
this,
And mine.
and Danilo's as well. So,
Mine longer than yours.
no, I don't think so, but okay. So I'm really honored and grateful to have Senator Tartaglione here to kick us off. And Senator, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you for having me to be a part of this crucial conversation. It's no secret disability rights and advocacy is important to me. I'm going to tell you how I got here. 21 years ago, on August 3rd, 2003, I was in a small 21-foot boat in the Back Bay in Atlantic City by Harrah's, getting ready to fish. A very big boat with very drunken kids at a high rate of speed hit the side of our boat and kept going. And when the wake came, I came up in the air, I crushed T12, and then I crushed L1. Thank God I still do have a little bit of my spinal cord, so I'm not totally complete. But before I really dig into what it means to support Pennsylvanians, or more simply, humans living with disability, I want to start by sharing a simple but powerful idea. Disability is not a limitation. It is part of human diversity. Just as our world is enriched by different cultures, backgrounds, and perspectives, it is enriched by the experiences of people with disabilities. It is so important that our society embrace this diversity and work tirelessly to ensure that every individual, regardless of their physical, sensory, or cognitive differences, is given the same opportunities. But let's face it, our systems, our building, and even our attitudes are not yet where they even need to be. People living with disabilities still encounter barriers that limit their access to education, employment, healthcare, and even social inclusion. These barriers are not merely physical, but systemic and attitudinal. First and foremost, it is so important that we help foster a culture of acceptance and understanding. Too often, people with disabilities are defined by their challenges rather than their potential. It is up to all of us to change that narrative. Acceptance begins when we stop seeing disabilities as obstacles and start seeing them as aspects of the person, just as fundamental as other characteristics such as hair color or height or eye color. This acceptance and understanding needs to happen in our homes, schools, workplaces, and in every space with people with disabilities navigate their daily life. Second, we must advocate for accessible environments. When we think about accessible environments, we often think of elevators to make sure people living with disabilities are able to access space. Too often, our public spaces prohibit people who have mobility or other issues that fully participate in public life. Take our Capitol, for instance. I have fought for 21 years to have an accessibility study conducted for the Capitol complex. For years, I have hosted a disability awareness day in the Capitol. Shameless plug, it's coming up, all right? October 22nd, if you're around. Every year, Pennsylvanians living with disabilities come and share their experience living with disabilities. And every year, we hear more and more issues with how inaccessible our Capitol is. Finally, late last year, a study was started that looks at the entire Capitol complex and how we can better make our State House and the grounds around it accessible to all Pennsylvanians. Let me tell you, you see press conferences where everybody's on the steps of the Capitol? I can't go. It is not accessible unless they throw me down the steps. And third, we must support policies and promote equity. We need policies that provide adequate health care, accessible education, and meaningful employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Just a few weeks ago, I was proud to join members of the House of Representatives and the Employment First organization, which would put our study on how our Commonwealth can best empower and support workers with disabilities. I also have authored legislation, which was Senate Bill 511, that would require insurance companies to cover regular maintenance of wheelchairs to help ensure access to safe and functioning wheelchairs isn't a barrier to accepting the world. Oh, hi guys, world. As you know, I'm here today. I can't help but think about the blood, sweat, and tears of disability rights advocates who have fought tirelessly that no more marginalized become a disability. Whether we are advocating for accessible public spaces, inclusive education, equitable employment, or any other aspect of life, we must keep pushing. Together, we can build a society where everyone, regardless of ability, is valued, respected, and given the chance to succeed. I want to say I am the only person in the Senate chamber out of the 50 senators that has a disability. It has taken, I would say, probably 15 years for them to now ask my colleagues if they're going to do something, is it handicap accessible? Oh, you rented a bus. Is it handicap accessible? The ladies' rooms are handicap accessible. Because you know how hard it is getting that stall that says it's for handicap and it's not for somebody in a wheelchair. And you have to be like Nadia Comaneci to, do the gymnastics just to get on the toilet seat. It's happening, but it's not happening enough. My colleagues see it, they recognize it. Even on my disability day, some will spend time in a wheelchair. Some will spend time with the infraction glasses so they can't see. Some will spend time with earphones so that they can't hear. Just so they can get a little bit, just a little bit of what we encounter every single day. This has to stop. I'm not going to stop screaming and yelling till we get what we need. I am here for all the support, but I need your support as well. So I want to say thank you, Joe, for having me, and thank you for listening.
And Senator, I think your experiences, even with your position, is something that people need to be aware of, especially when we go from what some folks would say is compliance with the ADA to really actually being accessible. And if you have that experience as a senator, we can imagine what our everyday citizens' experiences they're coming through as well. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is going to be Neil McDevitt. Neil is the mayor of North Wales Borough here in Pennsylvania. He is the first person in Pennsylvania, maybe in the country, to be elected to be mayor as a person who is deaf and hard of hearing. And I will leave it to you. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Representative Hohenstein, for inviting me, and thank you for Vice Chair Burgos for hosting this event today. As today's hearing is focused on bringing legislators closer to the issues that people with disabilities face on a regular basis without filters, this is something I see often as a deaf person serving as mayor and who often assumes the role of an advocate. As far as I know, there are only 2 of us in the United States today that are deaf people serving as mayors. That's myself and Mayor Josefina Dueñas from Ukiah, California. Mayor Dueñas has told me that she has no access to information being shared and no access to sign language interpreters because her community is so small. They believe that they are too small to be able to afford for interpreter services. I am very fortunate that my community, while smaller, is still able to make the appropriate budgetary accommodations to ensure that interpreters are available for me. Ironically, it's my understanding that in the entire State House, there are only 2 staff members with disabilities. The same number of deaf mayors in the entire United States. When people with disabilities are not working in the places of policy and politics, we lose out as a global community. When I first spoke or testified before this panel as mayor in 2022, I noted that there is no mandate in the Commonwealth to ensure hiring of people with disabilities throughout the state workforce and its contracted vendors. That has not changed, unfortunately. But this legislature has been moving the needle on disability issues in this session. From its historic investment in autism services to yesterday's passage of SB 1274, taking a first step to ensure the quality and quantity of qualified ASL interpreters in the Commonwealth. Thank you to all of the amazing representatives who voted for it yesterday, like you, Representative Hohenstein. This legislature, although divided, is putting policy before politics in some key areas. To make this Commonwealth truly inclusive, the people working for the Commonwealth must closely resemble its makeup. We have close to 30% disability rate in the state, but only 2 individuals employed as staff in the State House. That's a grave disparity. I would call upon the committee to commit to increasing that number significantly among its members, and also ensuring that the Commonwealth has programs similar to the federal Schedule A hiring program that reduces the barriers faced by workers with disabilities in getting hired in the Commonwealth. Thank you.
I note that we are joined by 2 of my colleagues, Representative Tariq Khan and Representative Joe Webster. If any of my colleagues have either comments or questions, we can have you take questions, Neil, if you wish. But if anyone has comments, especially about the experience of these 2 folks who are our fellow elected officials, who are moving through the world with their disabilities and what their experiences are and how that can inform us. Any of you have any comments? No?
I mean, I can just say, yeah. So, hi, everybody. State Rep Tariq Khan, represent East Falls, Menink, Roxborough, Chestnut Hill. First of all, very grateful for Rep Hohenstein for hosting this, as he always does. And my fellow colleagues, Senator Tartaglione, Senator Jeannie McNeil, Representative Jeannie McNeil, now Chair Jeannie McNeil, and also Representative Joe Webster, and all of you who are here joining us today. I'm really, really passionate about equity for folks in the disability community. Unfortunately, this is a community that continues to have its civil rights trampled upon, ignored. It's one of those communities. I think it's folks with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, just commonly, like whether it's in the press or whether it's policy, just completely forgotten about, ignored. And people that you see in front of you right now are not only have they co-sponsored, they're actively working on bills to bring equity to Pennsylvania. I'm working on several of them. One of them actually came from our discussions. We have a House Resolution 499, looking at the home and community-based waiver and making sure that services are equitable between ODP and OLTL. Came out of our conversations from people in this room, from Representative Hohenstein's policy seminar from last year. So honored to be a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go ahead and get moving. We are moving a little bit ahead of schedule, like I did actually tell some folks we would be doing. So our next panel coming forward is Vicki Landers, Jamie Ray Leonetti, and Chuck Horton. Vicki, you're here. Are Chuck or Jamie Ray here? Or we have to find them. There you are. Okay, come on up, Jamie. So go ahead and get yourself space. Thank you. Now, for my legislator colleagues, both Jamie and Vicki and Chuck, who's supposed to be coming, have all provided and moderated and participated in panels previously today that focused on the engagement of the disability community with elected officials and with our civic institutions like our government and like voting. So with that said, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, members. Representative Hohenstein, thank you very much for having me and for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Jamie Ray Leonetti, and I am the Associate Director of Policy at the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University. housed within the College of Education and Human Development at Temple. I'm also a person with a disability, and without dating myself too much, I can tell you that when I was growing up, people didn't talk about inclusion or the disability rights movement. And I really didn't hear much about any of these things until I was a college student in the mid-1990s. I went all through elementary school and middle school and high school without role models with disabilities from our history, and pretty much thinking to myself, gee, am I the only one who looks like me? A summit dedicated to amplifying the voices of disabled people? No, that never would have happened when I was a kid. But I am so glad to be part of this summit today, because when we provide opportunities for disabled people to share their experiences, we are recognizing that we all have a voice. We are embracing disability as part of the natural human experience and saying that it is okay to be disabled and proud. Professionally, I am privileged to work at Pennsylvania's University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, Education, Research, and Service. We are a statewide program, and we are one of 67 programs throughout the nation that are funded by the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities within the Department of Health and Human Services. We conduct training, service, technical assistance, and research and dissemination on behalf of people with disabilities and their families. And we have been operating in this capacity as Pennsylvania's University Center since 1973, which, by the way, I can't believe it, but was the year I was born. And we're so lucky to have State Senator Tartaglione on our Citizen Advisory Committee for our USED. So as Joe said earlier today, I co-moderated a panel with some other individuals with lived disability experience. And I'm so proud of those individuals for sharing their experiences and for talking about how important it is to speak to our elected officials and to our policymakers and to decision makers in the room. And I've gathered from them some recommendations that we would like to make to all of you to carry back to the Capitol with you and to share with your colleagues. So here are some of our recommendations. And we called this Recommendations for Promoting Inclusion of Your Constituents with Disabilities. First, recognize that inclusion touches all aspects of your work. For example, when you think about where to hold a town hall meeting or who to invite to testify, consider inclusion. Ask yourself, is the proposed venue accessible? Is the slate of testifiers diverse and inclusive of multiple perspectives, including people who have a variety of disabilities? When I was doing my panel earlier today, one of the speakers pointed out that sometimes when we think about disability, we may only think about people who have physical disabilities. But yet there's so much more in the world of disability that we need to think about when we think about inclusion. Second, please understand that inclusion is a long-term process and a commitment. And I think that all of you do because you're here today. It may require multiple meetings with constituents with disabilities instead of just one. And this might be necessary so that key concepts can be explained in plain language and so that people have the opportunity to process their responses. Being inclusive might challenge you to think about new ways of involving your constituents. For example, do you need to provide virtual meeting options for people with disabilities who may have a limited ability to travel? Do you need to prepare presentations and meeting materials ahead of time so that there's time to create plain language documents or braille or large print materials for people who may need them? Do you need to build in extra meeting time for non-traditional communicators who may use an interpreter or a computer to speak? Third, invite people with disabilities to participate in the legislative process from the ground up. For example, Senator Tartaglione mentioned the study that's now being done about the accessibility of the Capitol. So I would offer that if you form an advisory committee to look at this issue, make sure that people with disabilities are represented on that committee and that we have cross-disability representation from the beginning. Nothing about us without us. Fourth, look for ways to amplify voices and increase representation. Ask tough questions like, does anybody on my staff identify as having a disability? Have I considered hiring someone with lived disability experience to be part of my team? Fifth, we talked a little bit about this already. Don't stop at technical accessibility, the letter of the law, when true inclusion might require more. For example, it might be legally or technically accessible to provide an entrance for wheelchair users at the back of our Capitol building. But that doesn't make those of us using mobility devices feel included. That's why we need the study, right? Sixth, embrace the possibility that you might not always get it right the first time. But please know that we as people with disabilities see your efforts. We appreciate you, and we are here to help you along the way. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen today. Thank you for seeing people with disabilities as your neighbors, your constituents, and your current and future leaders. So let's work together to continue promoting inclusion in all spaces. Thank you.
Vicki, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for giving me this time to speak to you all. My name is Vicki Landers. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a queer, disabled, non-binary person, and I am the executive director and founder of Disability Pride Pennsylvania. I also hold the role of Rev Up Philly Coalition lead, and I am the DEIA chair for the National Council on Independent Living. I wanted to start just telling you a little bit about me, so you get an idea. For a lot of folks who look at me, they don't see that I am disabled. And that is a problem. There's a huge community of folks who, looking at that person, you don't look like you have a disability. I am deaf in one ear. I have multiple autoimmune disorders, whatever you want to call them. I always have to think about that word. I am a person who lives with bipolar disorder and anxiety disorder. But I am also a person with that uses a mobility device when needed. Sometimes I should use it all the time, but I'm not there yet. So I just wanted to give you a little backing so you see that, I am a person with lived experience, even though I may not look that way to most. So what I really wanted to talk about is first to talk about the things that are going on in the community, things that I want you to make sure that you understand, and the things that we need as the community for you all to think about. The first and to me, one of the most important things to me is marriage equality. So as a disabled person with a disabled partner, the system that is here does not allow us to get married unless they want to penalize us financially for doing so. And I've been with my partner for almost 11 years now, and it takes its toll on our relationship, knowing that we cannot sign a piece of paper saying that if I need to go into the hospital, that he is the person who is allowed to take care of me, because he is technically not my husband, even though we've been together for so long. Those are things that we just need to make sure that when we're thinking about policy, changing the policy, adding more inclusive policies, that we're thinking about folks who, like myself, and there's a lot of us, that can't get married to the person that we love because of the system that is set up. That also entails somebody that I spoke to today. Not being able to get the sexual wellness, sexual health, all the things that they need to become a couple, whether it's just being in a loving relationship, getting to get on a table to be able to get a pap smear as women, doing those kind of basic things, but also like family planning. You know how many people I've heard tell me that their doctors don't even talk to them about that? Like, it's not something on the doctor's mind that comes into play about disabled people having children. And we do. There's lots of us out there. But there's, that is something that is kind of that whole cycle of what's going on. So, and the next part of that is also the financial burdens and limitations that are put on us, so that way we can't thrive, To have some type of assistance, we're not allowed to have more than, I forget what it is, I think it's like $2,000 or something in our bank account. Well, how do you live? How do you plan for, at least pre-plan for a disaster that might happen? How do you think about having children when you're not allowed to have enough money in the bank to be able to support you and your children? I think that those those limitations need to come off. And we need to fight about that at all levels, because right now it's a federal mandate, but for the SSI folks, it's a state mandate. So I think that is something that we really need to focus on. If you're talking about the things that folks with disabilities need, these are, I want to talk about the basic things that folks need. I'm sure we all know that there is not enough housing. Well, there's not enough accessible, affordable housing. And affordable in Philly is not affordable like everybody else. Most of us live at subpar, with subpar financials. And I think the city their median is so low that we can't compare ourselves to anybody else in the United States. So we need to think about, everybody talks about we're going to build accessible, affordable. Well, that's great. But can we make it actually affordable and accessible? And I would like to say integrated, because there's no reason why you need to build an institution for all the disabled people to live in, because you can make an accessible building. Why not integrate it into all of the buildings and places that you want to build? I think it should be mandatory. I'm not sure if it's a law and people just don't pay attention to it, but there's the tiniest bit of a percentage of apartments or whatever you want to call them that actually have to be accessible when somebody builds an apartment building. The fact that it's the tiniest number, so it's like there's 2 in a building of 50. You know, that's really not building a place where everybody can live. You know, for me, I talk to everybody about building, you know, equitable housing. I can tell you that a lot of my friends, I do live in an accessible apartment, thank God. But my friends have no idea the accessibility that when they come in and use my kitchen or any of the other things. They all say, this is great. I wish I had this in my house. So if we thought about that and we actually built that way and had folks that built that way instead of just 10% or whatever that number is, built it completely so that anybody can live in that space at any time in their life. What that also does is it helps for people to be independent for as long as they possibly can and people to age in place, which is something that as a disabled person, I fear that I'm not going to be able to age in place and that I'm going to end up in a nursing home, which is not where I want to be and not where anybody would like to be, you know, at different ages of their life. I have friends that unfortunately are in nursing homes because there's no accessible housing for them to get into. They're in their 20s. That is not acceptable. So I think a lot of the conversations that are being had, and I know there's lots of conversations about housing, we need to think about those things. We need to make sure that we're on point. We're talking about actually making affordable, accessible, integrated housing and how that actually is best for the entire community, not just for the disability community. And the last thing I want to say is transportation. We need to really think about what transportation looks like. I know I sit next to my SEPTA folk, but SEPTA prices are rising. They're going to be unaffordable for a lot of us. They're still not extremely accessible. And what I hate most about it, as a person who's not allowed to drive because of one of my disabilities, I can only get to maybe the finger outside of Philadelphia County, you know? I can't get to Harrisburg on the bus without switching 4 times, you know? Yeah, you can take a train. They're a lot more expensive. And when you want to come in and you want to talk to you, come to the Capitol and talk to you all, it's an expense. It's not something that most people, not my organization, unfortunately, can afford to be able to come in and talk to you in person because of the financial burden of being able to get there. And then you talk about, you know, the Capitol itself. And we staged a Capitol crawl on May 1st, and we're going to be there again May 1st next year and every year after until we decide that the Capitol is actually accessible for everyone. So I want to thank you all for letting me speak, and I hope you all think about these things.
All right. Thank you. All right, Chuck, the floor is yours. And what we'll do is, time permitting, we'll do some Q&A after.
Okay.
From the legislature.
So I want to apologize for being late. I had to go check out the Eagles field. I mean, I'm an Eagles
Oh,
fan.
we know where you were.
Okay, thank you. So excuse me, so y'all understand. All right, all Eagles fans in here, go Eagles. Thank you. See my supporters. So let me just talk about a few things, and I know Vicki and everybody prior to here really talking about so many things that affect our community. But one of the things is when Vicki said about housing, people say accessible, affordable, but what does that mean? Okay, I've worked for years, and sometimes I get penalized with housing retrofitting supports, programs that will, if somebody don't work, they will go and renovate their whole house. Me, I put into the system, there's tax funding that's there, and I'm constantly putting in because I'm with my paycheck every time I pay, but I get penalized sometimes where I have to pay all this money, but I got healthcare, I got the same issues that everyone else, and I'm living by myself. So it's like so much of a burden. If I want my car to get retrofitted, I have friends who work and they can't afford a car because they can't afford the adaptive equipment along with the vehicle. So they're like, I might, if I don't work, I can get this for free. So it's like the system is almost set up for us to be a part, to be in the system and not a part to be a supporter and being taxpayers and being out there. So it's like, do the system really look at us as human beings? Or do they look at us as a burden that they're just going to throw something at? And what they throw at us is like subpar. You know, SSI is so little. Some of these programs are so little. It's almost like you throw us crumbs and want us to make a feast out of them. And that's not what we should be and what it should be. Why? Because we are individuals living with disabilities today. But disability will touch everybody's life in some kind of way, either directly as those individuals or into their family. So when the powers that be are not supporting the disabilities movement, you're not supporting yourself and your future and your loved ones. So it needs to be a bigger fight to address those issues. And when you say accessible for the housing, make sure that the affordable also is in to the people who also work as well, the accessibility. Because sometimes I was the head of the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities, living in my father's basement for years because accessible housing, I'm talking about 15 years ago, it was a 1-bedroom apartment, 1 bath, $2,000, 15 years ago. Okay? So, and it's like, that's outrageous. People can get a whole house at that point, you know, to rent a whole house for that much. So it's like, it's kind of depressing because you're going to say, I want to be independent. But do the world out there want me to be independent? Because it's not set up for me to be out there. It want to like put me in the back. And that's the way I felt. Because you don't, it's almost like you don't want to see us. We give you these crumbs, we put you in the back. This is good enough for you. Accept it and be happy that you got that. And that's not fair. Another thing that I serve on the Selective Service Board for this region. And individuals who males must apply for selective service by the age of 26, okay? If you don't apply for the selective service, you miss out on a bunch of programs. But individuals with disabilities, sometimes their parents say, they're never going to be drafted. So I don't have to apply for them. But when you don't apply for selective service, funding for school, getting government jobs, you're not qualified to be able to get those. So when you have people with disabilities, especially if they was born with disabilities, there should be a program set up that if you know that they have a lifelong disability before the age of 26, they should not be penalized. And sometimes you're waiting for the parents who don't understand. They're just looking at, my child have a disability, a lifelong disabilities, I'm not going to do it. But they might not understand everything that goes along with applying for selective service. So there needs to be some type of program set up for people with disabilities. If you before the age of 26, you do not have to apply, but you also still will be able to get everything that you can get if you applied for it. And I think that's very important. And I'll tell you why I say that. I was injured when I was 17 years old. I have a degree in biomedical engineering. All of the military, they all wanted me. They was wooing me, sending me, please come, we want you to be in the Army. We want you to be in the Air Force. We want you to be in everything else. Then when I said, okay, I'm going to come out, and I was like, you know I'm going to have a disability. Then it was dead silence on the phone. Mm-hmm. Like, do you still want me? Okay. When we know that some people, as serving on selective service, is conscientious objectors who will never go to war. So I said, well, why can't I do those jobs too, being in the service? It was still a no. So it's almost like my government says I'm not good enough to serve. But I want to serve in my government in some kind of way, because my dream before I was injured was to go into the military. So now you won't accept me. So how does that make somebody feel in this country where you say, you want us to vote, you want us to do this, you want us to do this, but I'm not good enough for you? Because that's what I felt when you told me I can't go into service, or I wasn't good enough, that you didn't want to talk to me anymore. Because it was no conversations after I told them that. So when you're a person with a new disability and you're already going through stuff, that tears you down. Another thing, I'm a gunshot survivor. I was injured when I was 17 years old. And the gun violence in Philadelphia is outrageous. Some of the things, and I have a gunshot support group called the Will Family, and we do a lot of things where I take people from independence to from injury to independence. And in that process, we try to get them driving, we get them in school, we try to do all the different things with it. But a lot of times, the guys that I have in my group have records. And they was like, I never thought I could go to school. They always thought that the streets was something that they could ever be. But then when we take them out, one of the guys, he's in school, he never thought he'd go to college, he's on the dean's list. He had to write a 5-page paper. He wrote a 10-page paper and didn't even realize it. They try to put him on all kind of writing things. And he's like, I never thought I could go to school. I spent all my time in these streets, and these streets put me in a wheelchair. And now I'm doing better than I was, but nobody ever supported him. And then another thing with that is, I'm sorry. Another thing with that is, you have 40% of the individuals that's in our prison system are individuals with disabilities.
Yeah.
Okay? So when you have that 40%, and if you ask the average teacher in our elementary schools, tell me what kids that you think is going to wind up in the prison system. You ask our elementary school teachers, they can probably be like, I think that one's going to be there, that one's going to be there, that one's going to be there. But they don't provide supports when you know that that's the avenue that they look that they're going down. Why? Why? And our teachers should be the highest paid people out there, okay? Because they're dealing and they're seeing the issues and they're seeing the upset things. Yeah, I even got a support from the dogs. Look at that.
I think you have a few teachers back there is what it is. I don't know.
But the reality is that our teachers are the ones that are able to identify the problems and set these kids up so they don't go down that road. But there need to be more support, some more openness that they can put them on a path to changing that. And a lot of these kids have learning disabilities, and it's like you put them in the corner or they go to the street, and you go into our prison system, and I work with them. I'll go down to JJC and talk to these young kids, and I'm like, they're brilliant, they're smart. And the thing with the problem is that nobody recognizes what they're good at and what they understand. But also, you have to take them and be like, cultivate that and push that to a higher level, because they never get that from anybody in their home or nobody in their inner circle. They need somebody to tell them that they love them and that there's opportunities for them to do better. And we have to, I really think it's important that individuals who post gun violence, where they need fast track to expungement, because some of the systems that's out there that will not support them, like housing, because if they have a record, they can't get certain type of housing, they can't get certain type of supports. But they've changed their whole lives, they're going a different direction, but it's so hard for them to get expungement. I have friends who paralyzed from their neck down, can't get into certain supports, but it's like, I can't commit a crime. I can't do anything for myself. So, but they are still being penalized for that, and it's hard for them to get expunged. People have gotten denied. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And one of the things that Vicky said was about transportation. And it is an issue, okay? And it's an issue because when you see someone, SEPTA asks for $200 million and you get $8. How do you expect things to get fixed when you get so little money? And you know that there's an issue. You know that there's an infrastructure issue. You know that there's more people with disabilities. You know that more people want to ride public transportation and want to get out. But if you don't fund it, how do you expect it to get better? People getting older and older. The disabilities population is growing. But you're not supporting the things with paratransit and all those things that go along with it. The community wants more from our transportation, but we need more money. Money will fix a lot of the problems, won't fix everything, but we need the support, that people need to come to the table and address it, that we're saying that. And then there's Uber and there's Lyft, and that's a whole issue right now, because you can barely get an Uber and Lyft because they kicked a couple companies out of systems. Now you can't get a ride, especially with the way. It's so many things that we really need to work on. And let me go back to about the gun violence. And a lot of people in families, because I'm also a part of a homicide support group. And when the families are left with a loved one gone, there is no support sometimes for the mental health because their loved one is gone. And I also want to address something else with it. This is something that a question I've always had, and maybe you can look at it too. When they say it was 500 murders in the city of Philadelphia. Individuals died the next year. Individuals died a year later from that gun violence. Are those numbers ever counted? They're never looked at again. I know they're not. They never looked at again. So when you say the murders is actually 500, it's actually more. But you have to recognize that if we don't look at the true numbers when y'all are asking for funding for things, but you can't get the real numbers of saying that we need more supports against gun violence and the murder rate is this and the murder rate is that, and you get flawed numbers, how can you ask for more money to support the communities that you're representing? Because you can't get the right stuff. So there's layers of things that is really affecting us, and I think this is a form, and I'm really happy that all of you are here and listening to us, and I've grew up politically with a bunch of y'all too, so it's I'm really happy that you're open to listen to our issues and wanting to address them, hopefully. And this won't be a presentation, but it'll be a relationship. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. So we've got just about 7-ish minutes for some questions. They have to come from the legislative panel. But one of the questions that I have for you that was sort of come up from what a few of you mentioned, investments in programs for people with disabilities. We've usually sort of seen that in a way that we're giving you something. We're doing this for you. I'd like you to be able to show us how that can be turned on its head, to be able to point out how investments in the disability community in particular turn into greater social good. What are the things that that we in the broader society get that might not necessarily be connected to the disability community when we decide to invest in the disability community?
Well, nothing about us without us.
Right.
So when you make those decisions to do certain things, is there a disability panel? Is there a disability community? Is there a disability something that is your, I'm sorry, you know, is there a disability group that you can kick these ideas off of that also understand politics, that understands the community, that's actively in the community as well? Because if you don't have people at the table who are, and I'm not saying not just complainers, solution-oriented individuals that want to come to a place where there can be outcomes that can actually serve the community in the right way. So until you create some type of sounding board that is represented by individuals with disabilities, that's willing to do the work, that you give them to support you to help get to the steps that you need to make things actually happen, it's not going to work. But you need to have us involved and engaged in the decision makings that you want. Pick up the phone. Have somebody that you know that represents the community that you can ask a question to, that's willing to give you untainted, a perspective that kind of not like that's pure, you know, that's straight, no chaser, Philadelphia all the way, straight at you, you know.
Hey. Vicky or Jamie, do you have any comments on that?
So I guess I would say that, it's one thing for, having sounding boards, having a sounding board. I think one of the things that we need to start thinking about is what does your system look like, so that the reason why we don't have enough disabled people in power, sitting at the table with you. Why do we have so few disabled people in politics? Because your system isn't built to be able to manage that. So one of the things Neil was very adamant about saying was that this mayor in California, they don't have enough funding for the mayor to be able to access the tools to make them an effective person. I think that's what we need to. I would love for you to look at is what, let's have a conversation and talk to the folks who actually are here, like Senator Tartaglione and Joe, that have disabilities, and actually listen to them and find out what are the things that you need to do as politicians. I'm not sure what legislators.
You can call us both, just don't call us late for supper.
Okay. Just so that way there's more disabled people who can actually take jobs in these positions, because right now everything is built so that we can't be. These town halls, all of these things that everybody loves to have, there are too many of them that are not accessible just from the bare basics of the things that are actually legally responsible for you to do, is getting somebody in the door, and that's an easy thing. You go and you look at the space to make sure that people can get in the door, but it's also, making sure that there's restrooms that people can actually use. There was a problem today with one of the restrooms, Think about what those things are so that the folks who want to be in your space, in your place, that they can actually go there and actually do a good job, be effective. Because if they're constantly fighting just to get the piece of paper and a document that they need, that is accessible for them, there's no way that they can be effective in the role.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And if I can just add one thing to that, I think I would say that when you are inviting people with disabilities to the table to engage in this important discourse and discussion that Charles and Vicki were talking about, just bringing us to the table, that's the first step. That's really, really important. But then once you bring us to the table, you also need to create space for our voices to be heard. So again, it goes back to what I was saying about making sure that we're looking at things in a cross-disability way, and we're not just making accessible pathways for wheelchairs and things like that, but we're also making space and making access for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who may need bills explained to them in plain language. They may need a plain language agenda or an agenda that has pictures on it. Whatever the person needs to access the information, we need to make sure is available so that they can have a meaningful opportunity to participate in the discussion.
Thank you. Representative McNeil, you had a question.
More comments. So thank you, Representative Hohenstein, for hosting this, and thank you for your words and thoughts. As someone who worked for 16 years for an IU, teaching job skills, how to apply for a job, how to get a job, how to keep a job, and how to get there are severe shortfalls, and a lot of it is funding. If you're on shared rides, sometimes they come 2 hours late. Sometimes you're stuck on the bus 2 and 3 hours each way. Public transportation, in where I live, there's a lot of rural areas. I would teach a student 18 to 21 how to get to a job, However, if they're in the rural area, 2 to 3 buses to get to that job. So it is a hardship. A lot of it is funding, and we need to do better to make sure when you have that job, you are able to get there and not be stuck on any bus for longer than anybody else. But I thank you for all being here.
Does anyone else have any questions for this panel?
Sure. Thank you very much for your testimony. While we're talking about handicap vehicles and SEPTA services, CCT is probably the worst run department that I've ever seen. They leave people for 3 hours, they're late to pick them up, if they pick them up. And you can't plan a life around what if. So, Chuck, I've been on SEPTA, to do what needs to be done. But CCT, should have a schedule, and if you're scheduled to be picked up at 9 at home, you should be picked up at 9. You go to your destination, and if you were supposed to be picked up at 2:30, 5:30 is unacceptable. 4:30 is unacceptable. 3:30 is unacceptable. 2:30 is what it should be. And I have been fighting this for a long time.
And I want to tell you one of the things of the community, and I'm not going to make excuses. I'm going to give you more information. That SEPTA has recognized that those are the issues. And we know it's not acceptable. We know it's a problem because there's laws that say individuals can only be on a vehicle so long. And we have to maintain. Listen, I would go back and paratransit to 19. And no, me riding 89. I started riding with, so that's a long time dealing with paratransit on various different levels and as a rider. So I know what the issues are. There's a new system that they just implemented like 6 months ago, a new system to do the tracking and try to make the streamline the rides better. Because we recognize that there's been an issue and recognize the need to do better. So hopefully this will get better. And it's been like only 6 months that this new system been in. And one thing I want to say to the community, if there's ever an issue with paratransit, and I'm a manager for paratransit, okay? And I will tell you, complain, put in a complaint ticket, because we can't fix it if you don't complain and you don't tell us what the issue is. And I have no problem with anybody complaining. I have no problem with anybody putting a ticket in, because if somebody on our staff do not do what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it, we want to hold them accountable. And that's where I am. Because one thing about it is this: the disabilities community, with some people that work with certain organizations, the people that they serve are not their friends. Y'all my friends. And I know y'all know my number. Y'all don't even call the office number. Y'all don't call me. Y'all call my cell. So,
Well,
Well, we do.
and Chuck, and that's one of the points of saying that the solutions to problems have to be implemented and looked at and reviewed by people from within the community.
Yes,
as well.
and we have to
We're
increase
running
complaint.
just a little bit short on time, but we do have one more question, I think, from Representative Khan, and then we've got to get to our next panel.
Okay.
Thanks, Rep. Hohenstein. First, I want to correct a mistake. I apologize. Our amazing Vice Chair of our Policy Chair, Danilo Burgos, I didn't recognize earlier, but he's been a champion for accessibility for immigrants with driver's license. Just a really great champion, and I want to uplift that. 2 quick things. Jamie, you had read a list of policy points for us legislators to consider. Do you think we could get a screenshot of that or get that to Rep. Hohenstein, or I could just come over
Yes,
and take a
I
quick screenshot?
sent it to Representative Hohenstein, so he does have it, and I'm happy to provide it to any of you. No
Thank you.
problem.
And-
I'll be providing it.
Thank you. And I wanted to highlight, uplift Lisa Biaggi from Unique Source, who's here. We're working on a policy to outlaw the sub-minimum wage in Pennsylvania for folks with disabilities moving forward. And but I wanted to ask about that question about employment. When I was hired, I hired a person with disabilities on our staff, and I have to highlight the Democratic caucus who worked with that person to make sure that they had all the equipment they needed for it to be accessible. And when we had a staff that was going to be, different staff that was going to be going out for a brief leave of absence, we were looking for a new person to hire just to come on for a brief amount of time. And I wanted to look for someone that had a disability. And is there, just really a question for us as we really are trying to, number one, address the labor shortage, first of all. Number two, we have a solution to that, folks with disabilities who are way underemployed, and connecting the two. So my question is, I was looking for people. I reached out to some folks in the disability community. Said, do you know anyone who's looking for a job? Is there currently a structure? So for us that we're looking for someone to add to our staff to help bridge that gap a little bit, is there a resource we could reach out to that where someone voluntarily says, I'm looking for a job, and I have a disability, and we try to get those folks matched up? I know we have groups like Unique Source that sort of employ folks with disabilities, but
OVR is a great place.
Yes.
Because OVR is a great place to start, because there are programs, and OVR has a lot of different programs within it that they're training people for specific jobs. They're training them back to go back to work. They're giving people funding for education to go to college. And the other thing that they do is just say, like, for me, with a car, OVR paid for my lift and my hand controls and my driving, so that I was able to go after different jobs. Because one thing I was doing biomedical engineering, the place that was initially offering me the job was in Jersey. So I wasn't able to afford the car, but I was able to get to driving. But then another job came in Philadelphia at the time. But they put me on the pathway of being able to be employed, because they had some funding to get me be able to drive. So once I was able to buy the car, they also paid for the hand controls. So besides just having a workforce that they're in training, they also offer other things to support the individual with disabilities to stay employed. So OVR is a great place to start.
thank you.
Good.
And I can tell you that you can always send them my way when you have them, because of the fact I get a lot of folks in the community that are always looking for employment. They ask, I have a screen of applications from, not applications, resumes of folks who are looking for positions. So, that's just one way that you can do that. And I'm also really good at putting that word out to let folks know that there is something going on and they should take the job.
Thank you.
All right.
And I agree with Vicki. Anyone, if someone's looking for a job, if you want to reach out to the Institute on Disabilities, we're happy to connect you with who we know in the community as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much. We have to get a little bit back on time, so really appreciate all of you coming out. And our next panel is coming up now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So the next panel is Sheila Hess, Tom Earl, and Mike Bovino, please. Sheila is
I gotta go.
current board member of Philadelphia 250, and you have to head out?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. And previously was the city representative from the Office of Services of People with Disabilities. Tom Earl is the CEO of Liberty Resources, Inc., which is an organization that works tirelessly on issues relating to accessibility and, frankly, disability community folks getting what they deserve. And Mike Bovino is from National Special Olympics, Special Olympics Pennsylvania, and he is the legislative government affairs folks for that. So let's start with Sheila. This panel, as I've discussed with you guys, is focused a bit on what are we looking forward. We had a larger breakout session on Philadelphia 250, but what is the state of the city in terms of its readiness to host some of these larger events like Philly 250, like the FIFA World Cup, and frankly, what are we doing around some of our major systems like transit for making Philadelphia the most accessible city that it can be?
Well, thank you so much, Representative Hohenstein, and thank you to all of our esteemed elected officials for taking the time to be invested in such a critical topic. And for this topic of cities of inclusion, I am Sheila Hess. I am wearing a burgundy outfit, a red sweater, blonde hair, black stockings, and black sneakers. I use crutches and wear leg braces. I was born with spina bifida, so I am a lifelong disabled individual. I have no sensation from my legs down, no movement in my feet either, but I drive a regular car, which my doctor said I would need hand controls, but I drive a regular car. And so I also use a wheelchair when I have to do long distances, and I sit a lot if I'm at an event, because I can't stand very long. But for the most part, this is a topic that I'm so excited. I was honored when you had asked me to speak. I was proud to serve as Philadelphia City Representative for 8 years in the city of Philadelphia under Mayor Kenny. But it was more of a special opportunity, not just to represent the city, but to represent our disabled community. Because to me, that was a true honor and a blessing to be out there representing the mayor, representing the city, and representing individuals with disabilities everywhere I went. And you see things with a different lens when you have the disability, when you go to these events. So I would go to the events and they were not accessible. Like, I was scheduled to speak and I would arrive and the stage wouldn't have steps to the stage. People would just jump up on the stage and do their thing. And I'm like, I can't get up there. I'm crawling to get up and do all this stuff. And, we made everything work, but it was never a comfortable situation that we were in. And so one of the things, knowing that I was involved in all the hospitality, the tourism, and the events serving the city of Philadelphia, I was always the good news of the city, right? So that's my brand, bring the positivity everywhere we went. And knowing 2026 is coming up and all eyes will be on the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly and sisterly love. We're the first World Heritage City in the nation. We're also the first #1 city with the most disabled community. And so one of our goals is to become the most accessible city. I know with Visit Philadelphia, we try to promote on their website, like, for all the tourists that are coming in, what are some of the venues that are accessible? What are some of the restaurants that are accessible? Because we are going to be 250 years old. A lot of our institutions and a lot of our, major attractions are just not accessible at all. So we need to identify that in advance before people arrive, and so they can try to make, special arrangements. Time's up? No. So I will continue to go. But this is some of the things I continue to serve, even though I'm no longer in the capacity as city representative. I am still as involved and engaged and actively committed to the city of Philadelphia, serving still on numerous boards. One of the boards, as you had alluded to, is Philadelphia 250, and that is where we will be celebrating the semi-quincentennial of the nation, happening right here in the birthplace of democracy. And not only that, it is the FIFA World Cup. It is the Major League All-Star Baseball game. It is the PGA tournament coming. It is the NCAA championship that'll be held here. That's just major athletic, events that are happening in the city of Philadelphia. Not to mention with our Convention and Visitors Bureau, we have some huge attractions that'll be coming here through January through December, putting us on the map. And with Philadelphia 250, we will be in the neighborhoods, and that's what Philadelphia 250 is about. And so when I worked for the city of Philadelphia, I worked closely with the Mayor's Office of Peoples with Disabilities and our Special Events Department. We have a long way to go with all of our event planning when it comes to the disability, mapping out, as you heard from our previous panel, we need to have a seat at the table. The Mayor's Office of People with Disability are now part of the planning committee within the city, which is good. That's just for like the big events kind of thing. But all the other events throughout the city that do not involve planning within the city operations, they also need to have a seat at the table with the folks with disabilities. That is one of my key focus areas, is to have more leadership in, no matter what role, corporations, government, to have a leader with a disability, serving on paid boards, all this, to have that opportunity. We are not as utilized as we should be for any individual with a physical, mental, invisible disability. We need to escalate that. One of the things I did when I worked for the city, and previously I worked 25 years at Independence Blue Cross as their Director of Foundation and Community Affairs, I created our associate resource group, which is called ABLE. And that was we called the ABLE the Associates Beyond Limited Expectations. And we educated our own employees about folks with different disabilities. It was also an opportunity for folks who worked there, if they were had a family member with a disabled individual, just to educate the folks. And the resource group also, I started with the City of Philadelphia. They now have a disabled resource group, which again is, you don't have a disability, you don't have to have a disability to join, but you can come and learn. It's a great sounding board and to be involved and give back to the community. But when it comes to the events, so with all those major events, the location for the World Cup, the activation sites that'll be happening for 2 weeks, that's going to be at Lemon Hill. They've designated it that already. That's a huge space, right? Grass. When we order porta potties for the events, we have to make sure that we have the accessible porta potties. Well, they have to also make sure that they strategically place the accessible porta potties for the wheelchairs, the larger ones, to be ground level. I've been at events where the vendor would drop them off, put them on a place where the hill's inclined, the wheelchair would go in, the porta potty would go backwards. The mud, you can't get in. So like the vendor's doing their job. Okay, there's 3, accessible porta pots right here, but it's not what we need, right? So they're the types of things that we have to train and say, no, here's where they need to go. We have to check if it's raining out in advance and the ground and the grass is soaking wet. My crutches sink into it. It's really a challenge in time. The handicap parking is always an issue at the big events. They block off the roads, the police block the streets, and you can't get close to it. If you however you get dropped off, you can't get access, you can't walk far if you are walking. So they're the things that we need to make sure that we leave space for the disabled parking and whatnot. For outdoor seating, when the guests will be coming and our own residents for outdoors, we need to make sure that there is space on the pavements as well for the wheelchairs, the walkers, anything, the canes that we have visually impaired. We need all that to be able to say for our restaurants that they need to keep this in mind. Volunteer assignments for our disability community. We want to engage as many people as possible to be involved and show up the day of these events and be part of it. And so the training, there's specific training that needs to be had for the volunteers with disabilities. You heard a lot about what needs to be done as far as like the signage, they'll have like certain sections for ADA at some of the events. You can't access it. Like there'll be a banner that says ADA, but meanwhile the crowds, they don't leave leeway for people to access it to get to the certain section at these events. The blueprint that we put together, it looks great, and then the day of the event comes and everybody swarms and there's no pathway anymore. So you need to make sure that you have the volunteer staff to train all that. Our hotels, they need to make sure that there's certain accessible hotel rooms, not that many. So that's another, we put on the Visit Philly website which hotels do have accessible rooms. Again, it's not as many as you would think and that we will need for 2026. The airports that, like myself, when I go to an airport, I need a wheelchair. And you wait there for the longest time for an airline to come with a wheelchair. If they have anyone, if you're traveling at night, forget it. It's like, oh, you know what? I don't know if we have any the staff here from this airline, because it's not the airport who does the wheelchairs. It's the airlines that do it.
Right.
They are not the best at being reliable or even have enough wheelchairs on site. So that's a big attraction that we need to focus on. For that, the communications and everything, we need to also make sure that the sign language interpreter is at every single event. We need the audio sounds. One of the things the city of Philadelphia did last year, we were the first city to become sensory certified. And here at the Eagles, with the Eagles Autism, with the sensory room, but companies now have the accessibility. And we have, you need to have like the closed captioning, the language translations, the descriptive audio, service companion animals, space for that. We need to have transfers, like I said, for people to do. We need to have the equipment for children or adults that need the sensory certification with the headsets and the tools that are needed. These are the things that need to be communicated in advance for all of the events that will be happening, so people know that we are thinking about this along the way and that this is something that will be included in all of the events that will be happening. We still have a long way to go. The transportation is going to be one of the, as Charles talked about, one of the big challenges that we face. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for that very expansive view of all the different things that we've got to be paying attention to. So thank you very much, Sheila. Tom, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, panel, and Representative Hohenstein, thank you for the honor of presenting testimony before this legislative session. My name is Thomas Earl. I'm the CEO of Liberty Resources, which is the federally and state-funded Center for Independent Living that serves Philadelphia and the surrounding counties.
Got a fan club.
Yeah. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Centers for Independent Living, we're required to provide 5 core services to the disabled community. And as Sheila pointed out, Philadelphia is actually has the highest percentage of people with disabilities of any major U.S. city in the country, according to the U.S. Census data. And ironically, we are probably funded disproportionately less than any of the other major cities. Not only at Liberty Resources, but also at the Office for People with Disabilities at the city level, compared to other cities like Chicago, New York City. So we have made progress, but there's a lot more work to be done and a lot more area to improve. The core services Liberty provides are information and referral, where folks can call in, and if we can't directly help, we will refer them to another community-based organization that can help them or has the resources to help them. Funding is always a big barrier. Skills training, where people with disabilities learn the skills to live independently in the community. Peer-to-peer counseling, which is a huge model for us, and one that was really started with the independent living movement beginning back in the 70s with Ed Roberts, the father of independent living, where there's no better advice or guidance that a person with a disability can receive than from another person with a disability who has the lived experience of going through the challenges that you are currently facing. So very important. advocacy at the individual and systems level, and transitioning services, which not only include youth transition for young adults as they leave the school system and begin to look at options for college, community college, part-time employment, full-time employment, whatever they choose, helping them with that transition and beginning to think about living independently. And then also, part of our mission as a center, of course, is nursing home transition. And moving people from institutional settings like nursing homes and other institutions to community settings where they can live independently with the community-based supports and services they need. We have just reached the 25th anniversary of the Olmstead Supreme Court decision. That was a landmark decision under the ADA that interpreted and enforced the community integration mandate of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that decision was decided in 1999 and incorporated a lot of the legal principles in the Helen L. decision and the Third Circuit here in Pennsylvania, right in Philadelphia, that says that people with disabilities should receive the services most appropriate to their needs in a community-based setting whenever possible. And that's the most integrated setting. And we have seen time and time again that this has not really happened yet in Pennsylvania. There's still a lot of guardianship abuse happening where people with disabilities and too many seniors are put into guardianship situations and forced into nursing homes against their will. We have worked to help address that issue with the aging system and the independent living system in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of work to be done with that. But touching on the community integration mandate, there are so many parts to truly integrating people with disabilities in the community that include accessible, affordable housing, so that people who move out of nursing homes have a place to live, accessible, reliable transportation with SEPTA and other systems across the Commonwealth. And as Senator Tartaglione mentioned, SEPTA Paratransit has systemic challenges. This is something that was litigated back in the late 90s. And I was involved with that with Steve Gold at the time. And SEPTA was required to make sure that they budget each year sufficient funding to provide paratransit based on the demand. It's not discretionary. It's mandatory under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And sadly, SEPTA has continued to face the funding problems in Pennsylvania, and we hope that you, as our legislators, can, together with Governor Shapiro, really fund public transit systems in Pennsylvania as they're needed, especially with all of the events that are coming up in Philadelphia, including the World Cup, and in 2025, the NCAA Division I Wrestling Championships that are going to be right here across the street at the Wells Fargo Center. These are major events that put Philadelphia on the world stage. And our systems of mass transit, paratransit, and affordable, accessible housing, hotel lodging that where if you make a reservation for an ADA accessible room, that reservation is actually honored. So when you arrive from out of town at your hotel to check in, that room is there for you and has not been given to somebody, let alone somebody who might be able-bodied and doesn't even need the features of the ADA room. I'd like to close with a couple legislative items. One, I'd like to applaud the members of this panel, the legislative panel, on their support of House Bill 2372, the Direct Care Worker Act. which is receiving bipartisan support by Representative Benham and Ortitai, and I believe Representative Khan and Hohenstein and others are already on that bill, and that we hope to see success with that bill in the 2025 legislative session. This bill would help address the inequity that caregivers in Pennsylvania face, where they are earning poverty level wages, often without health care, without paid training, at a critical time when people with disabilities are choosing to receive long-term services in the community over institutional settings like nursing homes. We have succeeded in rebalancing long-term care. The demand for caregivers, direct care workers in the community is a social economic justice issue. It needs to be addressed with a rate-setting structure that will pay them fair living wages, health care, and training so that they can meet the needs of many people with disabilities who want to continue living in the community. I was at there was a meeting yesterday where one of our leaders of the disability community could not attend a meeting with Secretary Kavulich about aging and disability services because she could not get attending care to come with her. There's a shortage, and it's only going to get worse, and we need some level of parity with the level of wages that we see in the ODP system. That's a system that rate setting has done well, and direct service professionals deserve every penny that they earn in that system. We just need some improvement on the OLTL side for people with physical disabilities. There's one other bill that has recently come to attention is House Bill 2320, which I think is sponsored out of Pittsburgh. And that bill seeks to establish presumptive eligibility for people who would go into nursing homes. And we think this is a systemic mistake. There should be presumptive eligibility for people seeking community-based services in the community instead of institutional settings. So any bill that wants to apply presumptive eligibility, we need to make sure that it's presumptive eligibility to automatically begin receiving home and community-based services in a community setting rather than a nursing home. This is the reverse of the Community First Choice option in the Affordable Care Act. And we should have presumptive eligibility to make it easier, not harder, for people to begin receiving cost-saving services in the community through the Office of Long-Term Living, or ODP. And if Pennsylvania was to optimize the use of the Community First Choice option of the Affordable Care Act, it could receive increased federal FMAP funding, which in turn could be used by ODP to reduce the waiting list for people with intellectual disabilities who are waiting to receive services in the community. It's something that is long overdue and needs to be looked at. And we really hope that this legislative body can help us with the caregiver wage issue and really address it in this coming budget with Governor Shapiro and the legislator, not in the House and in the Senate. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mike, you're going to be our last testifier. You can take us home.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Representative Hohenstein. Appreciate the opportunity to have the opportunity to share today with the panel and some important information about what Special Olympics Pennsylvania is trying to do, not only in conjunction with Philly 250, but also throughout the state of Pennsylvania to really promote meaningful inclusion. We all know, I mean, we've heard from so many fantastic panelists today, and there's some commonality of themes here. One is, what is meaningful inclusion? And the work that Special Olympics Pennsylvania is doing in the schools really sets out to really help young people to really have an understanding and clarity about what meaningful inclusion is, and to ensure that students with disabilities are fully integrated into their school communities as equal peers. And I think that's what's really important with the work we do with our Unified Champion Schools programs. We're currently in 464 schools in 60 counties throughout the state of Pennsylvania. We'll be in 510 schools this school year. Here in Philadelphia, we're in 43 schools where we're doing that type of work.
Including my alma mater.
Yes, including your alma mater. We're proud to say in this program that we bring together students with and without disabilities as equal peers. They play sports together. They also participate in inclusive youth leadership activities that really are designed for students with disabilities to be able to learn essential life skills that's going to help them to be able to live independently, successfully when they graduate from high school, to be able to hold a job, to be able to navigate some of the challenges that people with a disability do often encounter within the community. And they do so through this program by ensuring that their general education peers work side by side with them and help them to really develop those skills as, again, equal peers. So we're trying to help students who do not have disabilities to really kind of put themselves into the shoes of students who have disabilities and have an understanding about some of the challenges that are being faced. But again, to ensure that the students with disabilities are given the opportunities to grow and evolve on their own with, when appropriate, the necessary supports and encouragements. So that's one of the kind of outgrowths we're trying to look for. We go to Philly 250, and we always look at this as an opportunity to not only celebrate, but to educate. So when people come to this great city, William Penn founded based upon the premise of everybody coming here and being welcoming, which we always love, thus the city of brotherly and sisterly love, was founded upon, William Penn. This truly, if we're going to really talk about that, we want to make sure that our young people with and without disabilities truly are embracing what meaningful inclusion is all about. They do so through authentic experiences like playing on a sports team together through a unified sports experience where, again, they're equal peers. They're playing on sports teams where they're encouraging each other like every other interscholastic sports team in that school building. But all of the students within the school building look upon that team as an interscholastic sports team. Just like the girls' soccer team, just like the boys' basketball team, they're a unified team representing their school community. So through those authentic experiences, not only do students with disabilities grow, but guess what? It also enables students without disabilities to change their perceptions. We want them to really understand what true diversity looks like, and that happens when you have these authentic interactions with students with disabilities where everybody gets to learn about each individual's unique strengths and abilities. Not disabilities, abilities, because we all have unique strengths and abilities. And that happens very naturally and authentically on a sports team. It happens authentically in an inclusive youth leadership club. The other kind of outgrowth of this program, which is important as one of our very close partners, the Pennsylvania Department of Education has really focused on, is the lack of special education teachers, and we're seeing a decline. It's a crisis all over the country. Director Carol Clancy, who we work with closely at the Bureau of Special Education, and her team works very closely with us. They're trying to engage young people into showing them the opportunities that are afforded them when you become a special education teacher or a paraprofessional or an instructional aide. And Representative Hohenstein, it is a crisis. There are a number of teachers who are retiring, and you're not seeing the influx of new teachers coming in to replace that. So there are shortages, which means that special education students are not getting the services they need, or we're overtaxing and over-resources the paraprofessionals and the instructional aides by giving them too many students, so then the students aren't getting the sufficient services they need. We, Special Olympics Pennsylvania, are very much focused on helping those students who are part of our Unified Champion Schools program to, through their interactions with special education students, which are authentic, see that there are opportunities to be able to develop a career in special education. And this program has been a really fantastic facilitator of students choosing to go on to college and major in special education. And our hope is that we're going to see the fruits of that in the upcoming years as they graduate from college, stay in Pennsylvania, and become special educators. So those are really kind of the main initiatives that we're focused on. Lastly, I will say, Matt Aaron earlier mentioned this, as it relates to Philly 250. In 2026, we are bidding to bring the Special Olympics North America Athlete Congress here, which will bring Special Olympics athlete leaders from all over the continent to come together and talk about very important issues such as policy, such as best practices, such as things that they need in their lives. And then lastly, with your help, we love to host another Disability Summit in 2026 to bring together all the great stakeholders.
Well, definitely looking forward to that summit in 2026 as well.
Us as well.
And I saw a number of folks nodding when we were talking about the teaching shortage, which isn't just special education, but it does seem to have a special impact and a more severe impact on education. I'm going to just sum up right now and say thank you to you for all coming and testifying. Thank you to everyone who attended through the whole day. And I think we did some really good work here today. A lot of good connections I saw being made out there between folks who I think are going to need to talk to each other, and done in a way, again, that, as a number of you have spoken about, increases the ability of our society to recognize its own diversity and to take advantage of that diversity by supporting the people who have so much to give us. And that is, frankly, folks in our disability community who know what it takes to get through difficult days, and they not only know that, but they know how to thrive in situations. And again, there's a lot for us to learn in the broader community from the disability community, and I'm hoping this is a piece of moving that forward. So thank you all, and thanks to all of the partners as well for being here. And with that, we are adjourned.